minute or two, allowing people to log on. If you're joining us now, we're about to get started. We're just letting some more people log on to the event. We'll be underway in just a few more seconds. Well, perhaps we should begin. Hello and welcome to this special edition of Education Now from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. I'm Mark Elliott, Vice Provost for International Affairs at Harvard University, and it's my great pleasure to be here with you today. I hope everyone is keeping safe and well. Someday, the global pandemic of 2020-2021 will be behind us. One day, perhaps before too many more months, we will be able to talk about COVID-19 in the past tense and go back to familiar in-person routines in the classroom and the workplace. As difficult and traumatic as the pandemic has been, however, being forced to meet the challenges it has presented has forced those of us engaged in teaching at all levels, including in higher education, to think in new ways about what we do and how we do it. The pandemic has required us all to pivot creatively, and already it's clear that there are some important lessons to be learned from the experiences of the past year, some takeaways that can contribute in positive ways to shaping the educational future for learners around the world. Hence the title of today's event. Harvard is home to over 10,000 international students and scholars, and with 21 overseas offices and over 50 research centers pursuing some sort of international work, 65,000 alumni living abroad, we are deeply enmeshed in the wider world. Every year, the Office of the Vice Provost for International Affairs hosts an event called Harvard Abroad, which brings together stakeholders from around the university to hear from deans and other university leaders about what is new in terms of our global engagement. This year, for reasons that probably do not require much of an explanation, we have decided to take advantage of the opportunity to open up Harvard Abroad to a much larger audience and share with you some of the latest thinking among those at the university who are leading the way in pioneering the future of higher education. For today's event, we are delighted to be able to team up with colleagues at the Graduate School of Education and the Office of the Vice Provost for Advances in Learning to hear directly from them about what the lessons of the past year have to teach us and where they see Harvard and higher education generally moving when it comes to leveraging the best of the COVID pivot to enhance and expand the university's global reach. We are thrilled to co-host this conversation between Bridget Terry-Long, Dean of the Harvard Graduate School of Education and Sarris Professor of Education and Economics, and Parath Anand, Vice Provost for Advances in Learning, and Henry R. Byers Professor of Business Administration at the Harvard Business School. The conversation will be moderated by Matthew Miller, Senior Associate Dean for Learning and Teaching at the Graduate School of Education and Senior Lecturer in Education. Thank you all very much for joining us. And now over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Mark. Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to be here and to be in this discussion. We'll start this morning with reflections from Parath and Bridget, and then I'll be back to moderate our conversation. And we'll also take questions from you, our participants. Parath, can I invite you to start?
Sure, Matt. Thank you, and it's a privilege to be sharing the virtual stage with Bridget, you, and Mark. Thank you for asking us to reflect on this experience. You know, one of the questions I think we often hear is, what have we learned from the last 11 months of remote learning on our campus? And in particular, this question often arises, sort of, where does remote learning do better than the traditional in-person experience? And I just wanted to start with a couple caveats. So the first is, you know, as you very well know, Harvard has been engaged in some form of online learning activities for almost 9 years now. And so there's a ton we learned before COVID-19 and the pandemic. And I'll come back to that. Most of that was around asynchronous modalities, but we also had synchronous sessions. But the difference really in terms of what happened during the last year, as I like to sometimes describe it, is it took us 9 years to get about 300 faculty roughly engaged in online learning activities at the university. And then in March last year, it took us about 9 days to get another 3,000, right? So the scale was sort of breathtaking. And you know, I just want to acknowledge the efforts, the expertise, the collaboration across the university was remarkable in so many ways. And I frankly just felt proud to be a member of the Harvard community. The second is that remote learning occurred contemporaneously with the pandemic and the lockdown. And so it's often really hard to disentangle what are the effects of one versus the other, because our students were experiencing both these things simultaneously. Not to mention, you know, over the course of the year, there were racial, social upheavals, political upheavals that I think, frankly, were affecting all of us in the community. Having said that, you know, if we think about remote learning, it's important just to start by acknowledging the advantages of face-to-face interaction, right? We can see each other, we can engage serendipitously with each other through interactions, we can read the room, and so on and so forth. With that in mind, I think there's some clear advantages to remote learning. And to my mind, they fall into sort of 2 or 3 buckets. The first is, and Bridget and I have often discussed this, is the virtues that come from collapsing time and space, right? Essentially, everyone is one click away from anyone else in the world. And that has huge implications, which I'll come back to. The second is that digital media are fundamentally interactive media, right? They're lean in experiences, as we often say. And so that lends itself to what I'd call active learning and peer learning or social learning experiences that in many ways are better, frankly, than in person. And the third is reach and access, right? You can actually reach people anywhere in the world. So you put these 3 things together and you have some pretty powerful implications. I'll just start with the most obvious, which is the chat function that we have in this, you know, in this modality. And we've shut off chat, I believe, right now. In theory, we could literally ask a question, you know, what does everyone think are the advantages of remote teaching and learning? And immediately you'd have 100, 200, 300 responses, which makes the thought process and the interaction nonlinear, right? It can occur simultaneously. Whereas in the classroom, we have to go linearly one by one, right? By the way, that has all kinds of implications. As a faculty member is lecturing, you can have questions being asked by students, clarifying answers from other students. You can have at the end of the class summaries from the students about what they took away, which frankly, collectively in the aggregate often is better than what we can provide as summaries. You have breakout rooms where we can randomly interact with other people who we don't know, as opposed to staying within our groups in person. You have collaborative workspaces like Google Docs and so on. We could draw in experts from anywhere in the world. And the Introductory Economics 10 course at Harvard College last spring really took advantage of this, right? In the spring post-lockdown, they invited the chairman of the Fed Reserve, the chief economist of the IMF to come into class, which frankly would have been much more difficult pre-pandemic. And those are the kinds of things we've started seeing. We can engage with alumni in new ways. So you start thinking about all these things, and those are frankly the advantages of remote learning, which I hope we'll keep in mind as we go forward. The flip side is that if you don't lean into these attributes of the digital medium that make it better, and all you're doing is simply trying to replicate or reproduce what you have in the in-person experience, inevitably, it'll be a worse experience, right? But that's really, I think, part of the point here, which is treat the advantages of the digital medium on its own terms, as opposed to trying to mimic and match. So let me just pause there. But those are some of the things that we've seen now. And what's been incredible is to see this at scale.
Thank you, Parath. So we've learned that you can't just lift and shift, as they say in the IT world. Bridget, your reflections to start.
Thank you, Matt. And I'm going to build from some of what Parath just said. But first, let me start by saying again, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. It is wonderful to join you here. It has been a tumultuous 11 months, but it's also been a tremendous learning experience. And I'm so happy, to give many examples and talk a bit about how we've seized upon this as an opportunity at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, but also broadly across the university. It has been a wonderful time of One Harvard, of sharing learning and support among the group. So, just to start, because I can see, one of the wonderful things with Zoom is I can see already there's a number of questions. We want to get to the moderated conversation. So I'll just give an overview. And I would summarize the lessons that we've learned, particularly speaking as Dean of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, but also as a faculty member who for over 2 decades studied the economics of higher education. That's my field. I would say it's really expanded who we reach and then how we engage them. So in the first point, who we reach, because we have had remote education, because we've been online, we've welcomed a broader set of students who can then benefit from HGSE's faculty and Harvard's faculty more generally and programs, regardless of where they are. When the Graduate School of Education decided and announced in early June that we were going to be remote this entire year, we did something that we'd never done before. We had a short summer admissions period where we advertised, because our degree was going to be remote, it could introduce new people into our community. And what we quickly learned is that there are pools of talent all over the world who may not have been able to uproot and move to Cambridge. So we were able to welcome a diverse class of slightly more experienced education professionals who we have benefited from tremendously. And in speaking with them, they've really enjoyed this unique year that we've been in remote education. We've included, for example, the CEO from an ed tech company who has operations in Kenya and Ghana using mobile phones to deliver education. And this person is now in our classes learning, advancing their own practice, but also sharing with other students. A senior program officer from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the founder of Teach for Mexico. These are the kinds of examples where, because we don't have borders, because we're remote, we are able to expand who we are reaching. The second major lesson has been just fundamentally to rethink what is a university experience. As I shared with students during my opening speech during fall orientation, I believe August 30th, it seems so long ago now. What I said to them is that although we're not together physically, we would be limiting ourselves if we stick to the notion that a university is just a spot on a map, rather than it's a group of people. Or stated another way, we're selling ourselves short if we only think of HGSE or Harvard as just a place, rather than a group of dedicated, talented people sharing in a mission to improve education. So again, really need to throw out these old assumptions and realize it's about the people, not about the physical buildings. And so this has been a really important notion, I think, for all of higher education to really grapple with, but especially for the ed school. It's important at a time where we not only have students across the United States, but students in 62 other countries. So really all around the world. And as I told them, you don't need to leave your home communities to be part of HGSE. You bring them with you. And the hope is actually it's increasing and improving the educational experience because they're bringing their homes, their communities, particularly during a time that is so tumultuous as during the pandemic, when education is under tremendous strain, to bring those problems into class and for us to work together to advance and support students around the world. So again, just really rethinking what does it mean to be a university. And then finally, and I think Bharat has already touched on some of these points, but the third major lesson is just how we engage with our students and others. I would underscore, even with technology, people still matter. They're absolutely vital. And one thing we talked a lot with our students about is the fact that it's still the same faculty. It is still, the outstanding staff. We now just have to think differently about how you connect with them. And technology is not a replacement for authentic interaction. It's a tool. So, engaging, again, being deliberate, being thoughtful about how we still have those connections. You can focus and do that in many ways, as our faculty have discovered. And as we have been collecting data all throughout the process, whether through course evaluation, special student surveys, to see that you are able to accomplish this even while we're in remote. But you also gain several things. There's opportunities from being online. Physical space doesn't matter anymore. In fact, it doesn't confine us. When I think about face-to-face teaching in many of our lecture halls, you want to break out into small groups. It's hard to do that with our physical plant. But now with the touch of a button, all of a sudden you can have breakout rooms. You can have them random. You can choose which groups you're putting together. But we're seeing students are having many more opportunities to talk with each other, to build on the peer effects because of the way that we're using technology. And again, we're able to bring the outside world inside the classroom, and whether that's the perspective of our students or it's guest speakers, which I know I'm doing myself in faculty's classes here at Harvard, but also at other universities. And now I don't have to get on a plane. The hassle factor, it just becomes so much more easy to connect with others. And then finally, how we engage, we support our students, and that has been a major focus, our primary focus this year. But it is also our goal to engage with our alumni, to engage with our partners in the field. Again, education is under tremendous strain. In order to be able to move forward and bring about the change and the supports that are necessary, it means working across the field. And so the way that we have been able to invite back in our alumni, other partners, to really live up to what we hope to build is more lifelong learning. That even after you complete your degree at Harvard, as you go out into the world, and I just by fact that you're here during this webinar, that we can continue the learning process together, and you are still part of this community. So I'll pause there.
Thank you. Thanks for that, for the framing, Parath and Bridget, both about how we are learning and whom we are serving and the ways that we're serving them. I want to turn, if we could, for a moment, just to peel back the curtain a little bit about some of the organizational reflections you might have about this transition. It's been almost a year now. It's hard to believe since we went remote last spring. Lots happened. We've learned a lot. But in that transition, I'm wondering if I could start with you, Parath, about knowing, of course, that actually you're an expert on strategy. It's something that you bring from your academic background. So I know you have been an astute observer of what's been happening both locally and university-wide and more broadly. But here at Harvard, do you have reflections on the sort of organizational change process and how you saw the strategy for the university developing over this past year? I think people would be interested in that.
Sure. No, thanks, Matt. So, it was pretty remarkable, right? We had, as I mentioned, about 9 to 12 days, I think, to make the transition in the spring. And I'd say a couple of things there. The first is you needed literally all the parts of the university to work together. And by that, I don't just mean, the parts within each school, which obviously just sprung to life. You had faculty and staff working together, trying to figure out the new technologies. You had the faculty who were experts in online learning, really sort of taking the lead to run these training sessions. At the center, in fact, 2 days before lockdown, we knew this was coming. And our office was working very closely with the Central Technology Office called Hewitt, where they had to integrate Canvas and Zoom. Once that was done, we realized, wait, this is not just about the technology, as Bridget was saying, the pedagogy is actually front and center. Within 36 hours, we put up a site called Teach Remotely, which was really meant to sort of handhold faculty through the teaching and learning process. That then sort of became, in some sense, a catalyst for the local schools sites. The staff were involved, they were on Slack channels, just constantly communicating with each other. So there was a lot of that going on, right? The moment you realize that you're making the transition, you've almost got to stay then 1 week ahead, I keep saying, in terms of trying to anticipate what's going to come, in terms of the student's experience. And so one of the things we did was, once we had the infrastructure in place, we realized, wait, once the classes start, what's going to happen after 1 p.m., so to speak, right? When all the activities have gotten canceled. So we started thinking about trying to create sort of virtual events, a web-based calendaring platform that was common for the university, where everyone could communicate. By the way, we don't have that as the university. So hopefully some of these innovations might last beyond the pandemic. Then very quickly, again, as Bridget is saying, you start thinking about 3 months out, right? What's going to happen in the fall? And here I would say what was fascinating was, we have 12 schools at Harvard. Harvard's very decentralized. Every school was making its own decision tailored to their own needs and context. And Bridget and the GSE moved first, so to speak, by committing much earlier on to the year of remote teaching, which was fascinating. And then some of the other schools, again, based on their needs, were moving slightly later. Just when fatigue is setting in at the end of the spring, you start having training sessions for the faculty in the summer. And this is now rethinking the whole model, so to speak. And I'll just mention one thing here. One of the things we started hearing, I'd say mid-spring, was this observation that we'd love for the fall to be a better version of the spring. And some of us got a little nervous by that characterization, right? Because in some sense, the spring was a very constrained transition, right? You had the existing courses, calendar, everything in place. The fall, you could afford to step back and actually think about this more as a blank sheet of paper. And, I know the three of us were having conversations around this, but part of it was to really think about what are the possibilities in a slightly more unconstrained environment with respect to curriculum, calendar, drawing in experts, and so on and so forth. And so it was this combination of sort of almost thinking strategically, but then trying to really implement on a day-to-day basis. And to me, that was fascinating about this whole process.
Yeah, Bridget. So as Parath notes, we did make some decisions during the spring and early summer that were very consequential about the shift online. And I wonder if could you talk us through just kind of how you see the decision-making process that you were leading within the school at that time?
Sure. Thank you, Matt. It's amazing to think back during that time. There was so much uncertainty. We had rapidly pivoted during the spring. We were starting to look forward to the fall. I think I remember a key decision point was when you started to see the public health data. We became increasingly concerned about the fact that our international students were going to have trouble getting visas. And so, you really had to look forward proactively and face, the fact of these new realities. For me personally, as dean, I remember the decision when it was announced that we were not going to be able to have commencement in person on May 2020. And that is such an important event for the Harvard community in so many ways. And realizing that the pandemic had attacked that sacred event really, I think, was jarring for me to say, I'm tired that all of us are feeling back on our heels, that we are compromising what we want to do for our students, what we want to do for our community. We really need to flip into a mode of, how is this an opportunity? Not, again, to be giving up, but to be building towards a future of new things, new exploration that actually take advantage of the fact that we will most likely need to be online. And so these discussions started with the faculty in April. We eventually made the public decision once it was very clear on June 3rd. And then there was a great deal of work that was going on behind the scenes. I think some of the guiding work, first of all, we had to be clear about what our guiding principles and values were. This is critical for a community. I think it's critical, as leaders of the ed school, and Matt, you were definitely part of that team, to be able to say to the community, we don't have the answers to every single question, but let us tell you what is important. First and foremost, your health and safety, public health and safety of our communities. Second was continuing to support the academic progress of our students. But third, and it was important to call this out, is supporting our community and keeping our community together, even if that wasn't going to be physically face-to-face. So building from that, we had to have serious investments. As Bharath noted, this switch to remote education, not just in the spring, but really for this academic year, is probably the largest teaching intervention that has happened in education, and I don't know how long, but I'm very incredibly thankful that at the Harvard Ed School, we have the Teaching and Learning Lab. So we have dedicated staff and expertise who already had been working with the faculty for several years, coaching to improve their pedagogy and instruction. And then we're absolutely essential in meeting with faculty, putting together workshops, even putting together a course about how to teach online to be able to help our faculty rethink our courses. Because it had to start with, what are learning goals? What are the skills and competencies that we need to make sure our students receive? And then rethinking how to deliver them. But beyond our courses, we also had to think about student success. How do we wrap around and support students, particularly during a pandemic, particularly during a time of racial injustice and what we saw not only in the United States, but around the world? The economic impact in terms of recession, food insecurity that many students and communities were feeling. So we also had to think seriously about, how do we make sure to give mental health supports, social supports, along with what was happening in the courses. So it really did take acknowledging that all of us were going to have to work differently, both faculty and staff. And underneath all of this, I think from the top on down, and I tried to do a lot to really instill this, we all had to have a growth mindset. We were in unprecedented territory with, again, a great deal of uncertainty. We knew that we weren't going to do it perfectly, but having a dedicated, again, and talented group and community, we've made tremendous progress. And along with that, we continue to collect data. We continue to talk to students, because we are in continuous improvement, and we continue to learn and get better each and every day, each and every week. But you have to give people the safety. And I remember having many conversations with faculty saying, I just want you to try it. And you will be safe, you will be supported, and we're going to make it through. And I think we've even exceeded our own expectations and how well things turned out.
So another way in which we had to change the way we worked, that I recall both of you over the course of the year citing as an opportunity. And I'm going to start with you, Bharath, on this, is really about thinking about the global implications of learning. So in other words, if we want online learning that truly harnesses, as you've already alluded to, the fact that we can compress time and space, there are real implications for that. In our earliest conversations, we, many leaders in the university were focusing on, how are we going to engage with alumni, leaders, experts, organizational partners, government officials around the world. And I wonder, you've talked a little bit about that, but how is that actually working out? And are there promising practices that you've seen come out of that kind of effort to establish truly more of a global network for learning?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, Matt. Before I pick up on that, let me just come back to one of the things that Bridget mentioned that the GSE did, which frankly I thought was so innovative, which is have this extra admissions round, right, in the summer. Given that you were pivoting to an entirely one-year master's degree, the folks who had been admitted weren't expecting this. And so the question is, might there be a different pool of people globally who might be able to come virtually to campus, even though they couldn't before? I just want to pause on that because it sort of speaks to two things. One, this question that you're raising about the potential for interacting with students, with alumni, with experts anywhere across the world in ways we couldn't do before. And I'll give you some examples. But the other is, those kinds of decisions were being made every single day across the university. And years from now, there's going to be cases or books written on, why were these decisions made? Because you see the heterogeneity across the different schools at Harvard. And this was also playing out in all of education, right? You see different schools making different choices about the grading systems they would employ, whether they'd have asynchronous or synchronous mix. And it's just a fascinating set of decisions that I think we look back and really try and dissect more. So to the question about global interactions, one of the things that when we started thinking about what are the opportunities for the fall, in fact, Mark Elliott and I were chatting about this, and we said, are there ways to turn geographic dispersion from a liability into an asset, right? Because we're looking at this and saying, it's really unfortunate, which was the truth, that our students are going to be far away from us for the most part. But can we take advantage of the fact that they are in different locations? And the moment you start thinking about that, all kinds of possibilities arise. And by the way, we've now seen courses play out, taking advantage of these experiences over the last semester. There were virtual field tours occurring in some courses. I know at the business school, earlier you used to have field visits, you'd go to a company or a fab facility. Now you have local students and companies on the ground in different locations, basically taking a camera and introducing our students, regardless of where they are in the world, to the e-commerce center in Beijing, or the port in Hong Kong, or the relics and the monuments in Afghanistan. And those kinds of things, frankly, couldn't have happened, right? You had a faculty member at the Kennedy School who was teaching students about throughput and congestion. And as opposed to saying, let's go to Memorial Drive and see what happens there, why don't you actually study congestion at your own intersections, wherever you are in the world? Same thing goes for landscape architecture, waterfront design. You had these kinds of experiences being drawn out from the students by the faculty. I'd say we're just beginning to learn sort of what the power of these experiences is, right? And I think that's going to inform how we think about the future. When we think about alumni, so one of the things we tried to do was lean into our alumni to help support students with workspaces in areas where they didn't have access to them, or also just play informal advisory roles. By the way, alumni were also directly involved in the teaching and learning process. We were drawing them in as experts, and in some cases, they wanted to take some of the courses virtually that they normally wouldn't have access to. The last thing I'd say is, we focus a lot of attention on residential degree programs and the extent to which we can take advantage of these interactions. But if you think about exec ed and online programs on our campus, the non-degree programs, there were an equally large number of innovations happening there. I'll just close with two observations here. The first is 7 years ago when we created Harvard Business School Online, Matt, as you know, we had opened it up to learners around the world. The first cohort that we had was restricted to learners in Massachusetts, okay? And the only reason we did that was we said, if something goes wrong, we can probably interact with them physically. By the way, as you can imagine, we have a lot of great universities in this area. And when we finished that cohort, we looked at the results and the students had done really well. And we thought we're not going to get another cohort like this. When we opened up in the next cohort globally, we got 900 students from 300 universities. They actually performed better than that first cohort. And that just shakes your assumptions about the distribution of talent and where it lies, right? It's that, again, as Bridget was saying, a lot of people face constraints simply in being able to travel and come to where we are. If we can go to where they are, I mean, think about the possibilities. And in exec ed, you saw a little bit of this. They had an alumni reunion group for one of their programs that they used to have on campus. 150 people show up. They were presenting projects. And, I'm just going to read from here. Some of these included hurricane proofing projects in Barbados, sustainable city centers in Scandinavia, eco-friendly building materials in Mexico. And then one panelist unveiled a slightly larger scale project, which was to help partly in the reconstruction of Syria. Just think about that, right? where you have architects, designers, educators getting together, and he's sharing this project with his alumni, friends virtually, and you suddenly have many people saying, we'd like to be a part of that and contribute expertise or resources or skills. That would not have happened if they had to connect in person, because most of these people would not have been able to come to campus. So those are just some of the ways. I would say, I think we're still in the early stages of just figuring out what the true potential of this is.
Yeah, Bridget, I wonder if you could build on that just from the experience at the Ed School, the kinds of connections that Parath is talking about. I know one of the things that you emphasized and that our faculty actually really encouraged us to attend to was the quality of relationships and the quality of connections. Any lessons sort of from your leadership experience there?
Sure, yes. Absolutely, connections being important. My sense is, in being a former Harvard student myself, and talking to our students, they're coming because of the connections they're looking for with the faculty and also with each other. So how do we continue to maintain them? One interesting comment one of our faculty colleagues said very early on is that with being remote, with being in Zoom and so forth, suddenly everyone is in the front row. And you're clearly able to see all of your students, all of your peers in a very different way. And because people were based in their own home communities, there was also an incredible effort to try to understand where students were coming from. So you learned a lot more than just what was their persona once they come to the Harvard campus, but also what surrounds them, what motivates them, where are they working, where are they living? And so in many respects, again, you get that intimacy that's possible when you use the technology tools the right way, but you're also getting a much deeper sense of who your students are, who your peers are, and what they can show and bring into the classroom with them and other kinds of interactions. So it does take being deliberate. We don't unfortunately get to have the same kind of serendipity of running into each other in the cafe, but there are ways to create those kinds of connections, and people are certainly thirsting for them. So that's a great deal of what we've seen. But also part of that, again, this being a tumultuous time, we knew we were going to have to emphasize connections, but we're also living in this constantly changing world. And whether it was racial injustice or political, upheaval, both in the United States and elsewhere, we also realized we had to become much more attuned, much more adept at having conversations about difficult issues. Issues of race came into the classroom in a very different way. And again, this wasn't just with our American students. You were seeing protests, seeing incidences around the country, but we have around the world, but we have very different understandings and histories that we're building from, depending on where we are from. So, it's taking a lot, and we've had to be very thoughtful, and we continue to invest in how to have conversations. The increased diversity has certainly been a benefit, but it also, pushes us to dig deeper and making sure those connections, that diversity that we're building upon, is inclusive, is honoring the fact that we may not always agree, and sometimes just trying to speak in the same terms or concepts takes a bit more effort. But I think it's been very worthwhile, and we're seeing tremendous benefits from that.
Thank you. So I just want to signal that in a moment we're going to turn to questions from our participants in the audience. And I just want to flag that for those of you who are wondering, yes, some of your questions about what actually works, how we work with faculty, and a couple other topics will be coming up as we explore those questions in a moment. But before we turn to the questions that we're getting in from the audience, I hope you don't mind. I want to put each of you on the spot a little bit, because I wonder if others aren't thinking this too, which is, okay, is this just a pivot or shift towards a new way of working for the current period of time, or is higher education fundamentally changing right now? And maybe the answer is actually somewhere in between. So let me give you a more concrete way to approach this. And I'll start with you, Parath, which is, where do you think we'll be in higher ed in terms of the impact of this experience of moving towards online learning, where do you think we'll be 5 years from now? What do you think that just far enough down the horizon that it's reasonable to say you better get planning for it, and not too far down the line that it's pure speculation?
This is almost the second responsibility I think we have, Matt, as a university. And by the way, this is happening in almost every sector in the economy, where if you look at retailing, a lot of retailing shifted to e-commerce. You had to make so many adjustments during that period. People were moving fast, trying to figure out things. But then you've got to step back and say, what are the longer term implications of this, right? It's exactly the right question, I think, at this moment. Now that we can start thinking of a world where the pandemic is perhaps behind us at some point soon. I would say the most important thing that's come out of the last 11 months as it relates to this question, going back to something that Bridget said, is it's come into clarity, I think, in a way that wasn't true before, what we do as institutions of higher education. Right. And, and I think it's fair to say that, we often ask executives this question, what business are you really in? Right. And that's the most important question here, which is, I think we've recognized, and it sort of seems almost trite to say this, but it's important, that Harvard is more than the buildings on campus. It's more than the meals we serve, and it's more than the beds we fill. Right. Ultimately, it's about ideas. It's about engagement. It's about relationships. So I would say, Harvard, and this is true of institutions of education, schools and universities, is fundamentally about the power of content and connections. And if you look at it through that lens and you start thinking about what the implications are, they're manifold, right? If you think about access to historically disadvantaged populations, if you think about lifelong learning, if you think about engagement at scale, if you think about enterprise-wide learning, if you think about reskilling, these are the questions I think in front of us. What is it going to look like 5 years from now? I think fundamentally that depends upon us, right? It's a choice we will make as universities or as school leaders about, do we treat this as an afterthought and something in the back view mirror? Or do we say, let's look at all the experiments, projects, initiatives that took place and think about what this could mean for a multi-platform education going forward, not brick and mortar residential versus online. I mean, it's interesting, right? Like when we consume Netflix, we don't say, oh, I'm going to actually pick up my smartphone now and consume Netflix. We just say I'm watching Netflix, whether it's on the phone or on TV or any other device. And that's really, I think, the sense in which we've got to start thinking about this question as leaders in education. This afternoon, we're kicking off a task force, which is university-wide across Harvard, and Bridget and I are both part of that. Starting to look at the longer term implications. What are the transformative opportunities and possibilities for the future of learning and teaching that arise across Harvard? And so, I'm looking forward to those conversations, but really, I think we're just starting that process now.
Bridget, so your prognosticator's lens.
So really great question. And I think it's one we all wonder. So is this just a blip or is it the new normal? I think is another way to state the question. I'd first point out, before we went through this and even at the beginning stages of this process, I think there was a lot of skepticism about what you could do with remote or online education. Certainly this is a bit of a debate among our own faculty as we were increasing our skill, our investments, in particular online courses. What I think this last year, and again, we were pushed to do this even among the skeptics because we did not have a choice, but when we really focused on producing high quality experiences and thinking expansively about what this was as an opportunity, I think we have now seen much greater acceptance or understanding of what's possible. Now, but it's important to underscore, just like face-to-face learning, there is a range of quality that is possible, whether you're chalk and talk or really engaging interactive pedagogy. The same is true for online, but now we at least see what's possible. And I think that does set us up for some very important shifts. I would predict in the next 5 years, I don't think we're going to swing the pendulum all the way saying everything needs to be residential to now everything needs to be online. I think it's figuring out the balance. I think we're going to have, instead of, online or remote replacing our residential or face-to-face, I think it will be an expansion. And so this theme of increasing access, increasing opportunities, while not giving up, the immersive on-campus residential experiences as well, is we will see more. And I think it'll be interesting, though, to see how faculty, how universities, how systems try to invest and think about that in creative ways. But the piece that does worry me, and I think we have to acknowledge, is the disparities both at the individual and institutional level. So, for individuals, the challenges so many of our students have faced in terms of access technology, whether it's the computer itself or, the networks to be able to get into courses, as I remember having early conversations, it's not just about internet access. You need broadband, high speed, to really be able to use all of the amazing tools and interact in the way that we hope. But it's also at the institutional level. I mean, we are quite fortunate to be at an institution with resources, with talent, with time that we could give our faculty and our staff to make this pivot and be thoughtful. And we continue to have these discussions. And that's been true at many other institutions. But it is also, the case that, most institutions don't have the resources that we do. And now, as at least in the United States, as we see budgets being hit in terms of taxes, huge concerns about the funding that is needed for colleges and universities all throughout the system. And this is certainly true elsewhere as well. Do they have the resources to really invest in what high quality remote experiences would be? Do they have the resources, time, money, and so on, to also give additional supports to students, the wraparounds being beyond just courses? So I do worry, that if we aren't careful and deliberate and thoughtful about our investments, that we're just going to increase, the disparities. But what gives me, optimism is, having these discussions, but the fact that technology has enabled us to connect. More than any other time, I find myself talking with colleagues across higher education, other deans of education, faculty elsewhere, and not just in the United States, but for the first time, you really see exchanges of information across national borders. Some of this was just, some other countries being ahead of us and reopening and us trying to learn from their examples. But with that exchange of information, with the building of relationships across systems, universities, countries, that is the precursor to the possibility of partnerships and sharing what we know. If we created a magnificent course, how can we share that with other universities, with other communities? As we learn more, because so many have been tackling this issue of how to support students who don't have access to the technology and the networks, how can we learn from each other about how to help solve that problem? So real concern, but also real possibility. And it will be determined by what we choose to do going forward.
And can I just follow up, Bridget, because this is just transitioning to a question that we're getting from the audience. How do you think about what some are calling a mental health crisis right now? On the one hand, innovation in pedagogy and a real focus on teaching well online are critically important. But we also know that many learners, not just in higher education, it's also true in K-12. Frankly, it's true of people in workplaces. But for us, we know from even CDC recent data that's been produced about the mental health of young adults in colleges. How are you thinking about that issue when it comes to access, it comes to being able to engage in the kind of high quality learning that you're creating? What are we doing about that? How are you thinking about that?
Yes. So one thing I would acknowledge is we've been focused and as you just said, really thinking about our students and the trauma, the pressure that they're going through. But I remember having a meeting with the student council, and I said, but you do realize you're not the only ones going through this. It's also the faculty, it's also the staff. It is the entire community. It's not isolated to just one segment. And so in many respects, we are all in this together. I hope that this, first of all, changes the stigma or reluctance that some, in some corners have about the importance of mental health supports. So we need to be very serious about this. We need to understand how it is central to everything that we do, whether you are a learner, whether you are a faculty member or instructor, whether you're public, private sector, it doesn't matter. But if you don't have that strong foundation, it will hurt you in so many ways. So I'm hoping to see more attention, more investment in those pieces. And for our students in particular, to get back to your question, what we realized long ago is a student who is struggling, oftentimes it's not just academic. And it's not just social, or it's not just social emotional, that they're intertwined so intimately that we had already been moving to a model that really thought about student success and student support with both sides of the house, both the kind of student affairs as well as the academic affairs working together in concert, because again, these are not isolated problems, but that we really have to bolster the kind of mental health supports. And that includes greater awareness, being able to recognize when someone's in trouble, realizing that it can't just be done in orientation. You don't know if a student is going to stumble on day 7 or day 83. So you have to build a system that is ready to respond in that way. And we also know it's not just the critical cases when students are in crisis, but it is the everyday kind of support that we have to watch very carefully, particularly in this pandemic. Every day, is kind of is chipping at you. And so again, it's I don't have all the answers on this, but again, can we build from the fact that it's not just the students, it's also the faculty and staff. We're all in this together, and we all have to figure out how we're going to support each other.
Parath, let me direct a different question to you. This may be a little bit more nuts and bolts, but at least some folks are wondering, what are some tips, tricks, concrete learnings about what keeps students engaged online? What have we learned that someone could take away from this meeting and know that they could learn some more about, and it has a relatively good probability of improving the learning experience? What have we concretely learned?
Yeah, good question, Matt. So I would boil it down to a few things. One, I think we do have faculty who love to experiment with tools and technologies. Don't try that, right? Just stick to the basics. Zoom, Canvas actually allow you to do many things. Again, if you're new to this, right? If you're not, there's a whole set of different possibilities. First, figure out certain features of the technology that you want to be able to leverage. And I would say, let's say you're using Zoom or Teams, it's chat, breakout rooms, and collaborative workspaces. Those are 3 things. And notice what's interesting about those 3 things. They're all ways to engage students more actively in the learning process. And that brings me to my second point, which is, I would say pedagogy still dominates overwhelmingly the importance of technology. As Bridget was saying, ultimately, it's about human interaction through this virtual screen. And when it comes to that, sort of the lecture mode simply does not work online, right? What are the ways we can engage students? We've learned a lot about this. In fact, we knew about this pre-pandemic. To my mind, I would say 3 things that I often sort of advise my junior colleagues, or sometimes even senior colleagues, is think about ways to provoke the interest of students for every single class, right? How you draw them in to the material in a way that's relevant or interesting to them. So provoke. Allow them to discover the key learnings on their own, as opposed to you telling them what these are, so they can take ownership. And the last is, how do you generalize from those key learnings beyond the particular case or concept or theory that you're talking about? So to my mind, it's provoke, discover, generalize. Those are the 3 tips I would suggest.
Great. The super helpful as a framework, I think. So I think we have time for just one more question. So I'm going to pack a couple together here that are going to take us back into that prognostication mode. I want to ask on behalf of several members of the audience, how do you think our campuses, and we can think about Harvard specifically to make this more concrete, how do you think our actual campuses will be affected by the move toward technology? In other words, do you see different kinds of learning spaces, different kinds of housing, different forms of investment that we make in the physical campuses? And then, as another person asked, aren't we going to be able to offer education at Harvard to more people? And if so, what order of magnitude does that more mean? Is it, you know, an extra program here or there? So how do you think both about our campus spaces, and then in the time-space continuum, we've been talking about how you think about how you get more people now that we can compress our interactions and work with people anywhere in the world? Bridget, I'm going to turn this to you first.
Okay, Matt, really great question, a hard one for sure. So let me just offer a few thoughts. So as we think about our physical campuses, you know, what we're really thinking about is how do we join people together? You know, we were very focused, and maybe it's an old way of thinking of, well, we need larger rooms, or we need rooms that we can break out, or, you know, with moving walls to have breakout sessions and so forth. And now I wonder, you know, how do we think about using technology to complement some of those pieces? When you think, you know, and Bharath has mentioned this before, when you think about synchronous versus asynchronous, you know, if you're doing synchronous learning online, you really want it to be the debates, the discussions. And I think that's also true for face-to-face learning. When you don't just want to have a lecture when you're face-to-face, that's valuable time. What can we put using technology asynchronously, you know, just basic content, background foundation, so that when we come together, it is more interactive. And so the implication for the physical space is, well, what do the spaces need to look like if our time on campus is more of that interactive debate, discussion, group work, and so forth? So maybe it does make us think a little bit differently than humongous lecture halls to more flexible, smaller spaces that really support and prioritize what face-to-face learning or interactions are best for versus, you know, other kinds of teaching or moments in a course that might be done elsewhere or some other way. But I think it is a really exciting time. And so it is fun to talk to colleagues across the university who think more about spaces in creative ways and to continue down that line. The question about the size of how many students we can support, I think, is a great one. And you've seen, because we were remote and we were able to open up access and to reach students around the world, we were able to grow just slightly this year. And we're thinking seriously about that. But so there are some unknowns and big questions that I have, because our educational system, our process, the Harvard, the way we do things is so based on connection and individuals. You know, we still have a faculty that may be limited in just how much time they can spend. So the question is, how can we use the technology to leverage the faculty that we have to possibly support more students? I don't think what we want to do is, just because we can be online, you know, grow tremendously, but cut down on that essential element of connection, access to the experts in the field, the engagement. So we would have to do this cautiously, again, holding on to that principle of the quality of the interaction. A big question I know we have as we look at our data is, well, while we've been on remote, how does that change what students need and what they're seeking? Is it easier? Does it take more time, less time? How will this change as we continue to grow and learn and we get to a, you know, more of an equilibrium or steady state? In the long term, we may be able to figure out how to do this better to be able to serve more with the same faculty. But I think the verdict is out. And I would just caution, again, holding on to the principles of the quality of the experience, the connection, the engagement, that we don't just expand but, you know, forego or compromise those key principles.
I just add one quick thing, Matt, to what Bridget is saying. I mean, in some sense, I think the answer to the first part of your question depends on the answer to the second part, right? Which is, you know, this goes back to this question of multi-platform. Historically, we've had an experience residentially for our degree programs, which was 100% on campus. And over the last 7 to 9 years, what we've learned now is online programs, non-degree programs, certificate programs, 100% online. I think what this moment allows us to do is to start thinking about slightly more flexible experiences where maybe 10% of the time our residential students might be able to be virtual and spend a semester somewhere or go for a month somewhere. And vice versa. I mean, we've had online students who've come to campus for one day, sometimes just to meet each other. And those are remarkable opportunities to connect and network. Once you look at it that way, then you cycle back into asking, okay, what does that mean for our physical campuses? And hybrid classrooms is obviously one key area. But the other is, thinking about ways we can draw in people, experts, students, alumni, learners from around the world. How does that shape our campuses? I think those are the questions we're starting to think about. The one thing I will say, though, is the river is not going away anytime soon.
That's true. And on that note, I'll turn things back to Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Thank you, Parath. Thank you so much, Bridget. This has been just a fascinating and enlightening exchange and given us all a great deal to think about. I've been scribbling notes, and I'm sure many of you have been doing the same thing. The challenges are great, clearly. It seems we are at an inflection point, whether we like it or not, and possibilities for more and better engagement with local and global communities are clearly there. They're exciting to ponder. There's a lot of work to be done for sure. I want to close here by thanking our panelists, thanking the outstanding team at the Graduate School of Education for all of their work to support the event, as well as the teams at the VPAL office and in my Office of International Affairs for their work as well. But special thanks to you, our audience, for joining us today, for your amazing questions. We are archiving those, and we will be taking them back and thinking long and hard about the many excellent points you have made here. So with that, I wish you all a very good day and good health. Thank you.